Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Should I Start a Podcast? Here, we allow you to answer the question, should I start a podcast? My name is Ronsley, and the founder of Amplify, the first audio marketing agency in the world, and the host of Australia's first podcasting conference, We Are Podcast. Each week, I'll be working on giving you the tips, tricks, and ingenious hacks when it comes to monetizing your podcast, creating a unique show, and learning from some of the best out there. And by the way, start a podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Should I Start a Podcast? In this week's episode, Ronsley talks with the host of the Emma Guns show, Emma Guns, about the power of conversation, how consistency is a key factor in podcasting, and why you should focus on getting quality guests above anything else. But enough from me, let's jump right into it.
I had such a crazy upbringing. I was born in Bahrain. I lived there for 6 years, then lived in Goa, and then moved to Australia. And so I've got these little bits and pieces of different parts of the world, right? And it's fascinating that after all these years that I never thought race was an issue at all, ever. I never thought that race was a thing. Like I just thought and now with everything happening with race and how, growing up, it was like, well, just try to say it right. So, someone with English could understand, right? Even us growing up, like mom and dad made the decision to speak in English so that we could just, have English in, So I wanted to start with that and then go into your podcast, obviously, journey, but maybe start with that as a starting point in terms of, do you see any of that in the conversations you're having now? Has that always been the case? I've always been really interested in how we all have different perspectives, guys, women, this big disparity in how we see the world. So how does that all factor, especially with your background, probably Indian? Is there some Indian in your heritage?
So I'm a mixture of English and Sri Lankan.
Really interesting. There you go. So Sri Lankan, which means, like, can you give me a backstory? How did this all work?
So my father is Sinhalese and my mother is English, and he came to England when he was, I think, 17, and because he wanted to be a rock star, I think, fundamentally. But it was that thing of the land of opportunity, and as a 17-year-old, and he was brought up in an English-speaking household, and he went to an English-speaking school and what have you. So I remember he's really hot on how my brother and I speak. So if I go home and I drop a T and it's not received English, then I will get, still now as a 2-year-old woman, I will still get corrected. But he was told when he came over to England, listen to the World Service, and that's how you speak. And so, I have never, ever considered it. But like you were saying, I've never considered it race a thing. And that's obviously been something I've had to question recently, because I have a lot of my friends saying, no, you can't go around saying race isn't a thing. I don't see race. Like, see it. But I personally have never thought about it in any significant way. And somebody asked me recently, do you think being mixed race, being BAME, as we say over here, I don't know if it's the same over there, but do you think that has ever held you back? Do you think you've ever been discriminated against in the media? And I just thought, I'd never even thought about it. I thought every time I didn't get an opportunity or things didn't go my way, I thought it was because I either wasn't good enough for the job or because I didn't fit, because I was a bit of a prat. Like it never occurred to me to think that maybe, and so that's the lens I choose to look through, which is that if someone doesn't like me, it has nothing to do with my DNA.
Well, the reason I ask this is because I held, this exact same belief system. In fact, I was at a entrepreneurial retreat in Los Cabos, Mexico. This is when we could travel last year, at the end of last year.
Mexico is so nice.
It was so good. And there was a session about minorities, and everyone was like, "Aren't you attending?" And I'm like, "I'm not a minority." Like I thought of myself. I'm like, "There's so many brown people on the planet. I'm not a minority." And then I understood the context of what they were talking about. But it's fascinating because I didn't even think about it the same way. I thought about like just exactly like you. I was like, and I do feel like I'm privileged in the sense that, I've got a chance to see different parts of the world and have, the opportunity to pick the best parts, I suppose. So it's fascinating how someone else sees that. And so I'm super interested.
Yeah, like you say, I've never really thought about it. I've never thought, I'm walking into this job on a magazine and I might be at a disadvantage because of. I'm not. Although I will say this, I have always been aware that my surname Gunavardhana is long, complicated, doesn't look how it's supposed to be said, and it's a hurdle. And I have sent out CVs in the past and thought, that's the first thing they're going to see. I wonder if that's because it's a difficult name. I didn't then associate it with all the other stuff. But I remember going to a hotel with a friend once. We were doing travel reviews. And so we were both registered at the hotel. And when we arrived, the receptionist pulled out the 2 cards with our names on, looked at one, put it down on the table, and then said to my friend, "Are you Ms.?" And clearly she just decided not to attempt my name. And it's little things like that you just see but then like I try to avoid looking like a fool. And if I thought I was going to look like a fool by fluffing up someone's name, then I probably would say the easier name. I don't think it implies discrimination.
No, I of course, everyone's reading into everything quite literally a lot these days. It's just interesting to get perspective, especially on a podcast, because I feel like it's a responsibility these days. Being a podcaster, we have the opportunity to have the platform and have the voice and have the say and refine it, right? More importantly, because I definitely didn't believe the things that I believe now that every time new stuff that I'm learning about how I see the world. So it's just, fascinating to have the conversation. Let's talk about the Emma Gunn show before we go to the rabbit hole. What a phenomenal show. And obviously it's something it feels like it just started and was an organic thing that happened. How did that all come to be? And what is your memory right now thinking, 8 million listeners on, memory of the show? Like, what are the highlights that you remember?
Oh, wow. That is such a good question. It really did come out of not having ever found a groove anywhere else in media. Like, even though I was over a decade in. And I think I thought for a long time I wanted to be this sort of woman who wrote for glossy magazines and wrote exclusively about beauty, because I knew what those women looked like, and they were glamorous and successful, and their lives seemed to be really cool and easy. And so I thought, I want some of that. But I didn't really succeed in that field. And I just became aware, like, at some point you have to acknowledge, or you have to accept, I'm not, that's not me. I don't have those skills. And actually I remember writing a feature when I was freelance and just thinking, it shouldn't be this hard, and you shouldn't have to, it shouldn't be like this. And so I decided to switch to video. So I tried my hand at YouTube for a bit, but didn't do the prep work, and quite rightly fell on my face like a fool. So that's fine, because you have to, failures are a stepping stone to success. And sort of at the same time as I was beginning to think, I made a mistake here. I need to leave the media. This isn't my destiny. I was listening to loads of podcasts. So I was listening to Tim Ferriss. I was listening to a lot of Tim Ferriss, because by the time I discovered Tim about 5 years ago, he already had quite a significant back catalogue of some amazing guests. And I was really tuned into shows like that. And I just thought, maybe that's what I need to do. So when you say about it being organic, it kind of is, because I started it as a beauty podcast. And I remember lots of people in the industry saying to me, how on earth can you talk about beauty on an audio platform? It's a visual medium.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's the stories behind the beauty. Like, that's the thing. And and it was a slow sort of tick, 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 tick. And it just evolved. It really did evolve very naturally. And I think for me personally, it was on magazines, someone always is setting the agenda. Like, we're going to do a feature on this, or if you have an idea, they say, right, well, can you do it in this way? And then it starts being seen through lots of different lenses. But it was a really lovely experience to start creating content and go, I'm going to do a show about hormones, and just go and just do it.
Yeah. So obviously 8 million listeners on, which is, congratulations, by the way. That's a big achievement, especially in the podcast game. How do you feel like when you think about the engagement piece, like if you're trying to reverse engineer it for like other podcasters listening, like what's the engagement piece there? Like, what are people engaged to? Like, how are you like entertaining them on the show? Because information is freely available, right? You're finding a way to keep them entertained for that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very good at the reverse engineering thing. I think I was lucky in the sense that I hit podcasting in the UK at a time when it was still very new. It was what people were calling a white space. So by the time sort of podcasting hit a bit of a peak, I already had a back catalogue and I'd already attracted an audience. But I mean, I didn't do anything specific to do that. It was just Instagram and I think consistency. And a lot of the first interviews I did were with people who had made huge amounts of success via YouTube and blogs. And each and every single one of them said the key is consistency. Same time, every week, non-negotiable, let people know where you're going to be. And so I stuck with that. And then I really always, from the beginning, it's always, my DMs are always open. Email me, thebeautypodcast@gmail.com, if you've got an idea if you want me to discuss a subject. And so that's what I have always been really open to. So if somebody emails me, trust me, I put a video up on Instagram yesterday and I've just been checking my phone, as you saw when we got online. And I have loads of comments from people. And basically I read them and I think, I feel like an idiot because I think I should have included that in the video. Oh no, I'm such a fool for publishing it. Oh, why didn't I think of that? But that's where your listeners and your followers come into their own, because you only, as we've talked about, I only have a perspective and I try to be as broad in that way so that I can answer as many questions as possible. I always try to be general and bear in mind the perspective that isn't mine. But that's what listeners and followers are fantastic for, because they get in touch and they let you know what they want, or they let you know what was missing from a show, and then you can build another one. So I don't know if that's reverse engineering it, but that's just how I've always approached it.
Well, it's an important part, right? It's an important part of what you talk about it's almost like a call to engagement as opposed to a call to action, because everyone thinks about a call to action. You're actually calling them to engage with you in a way that's actually giving you more content almost.
Yeah, just for me, it's just really important to know what people, if I'm doing a show on hormones, for example, I have a predominantly female audience, so those shows do very, very well. And I've probably done about 15 shows on hormones. And it's that thing of just because you've done one show doesn't mean there isn't another one that you can create pretty quickly that will be just as valuable, if not more so.
It's always fascinating. I mean, I've been doing this since 2013,
wow.
Right? So I've done maybe thousands, maybe, I don't know, over 1,200 interviews easily, in different formats, and obviously help different people. But what's fascinating is what I've learned from the whole situation is how bad a listener I used to be, and how every time I do these interviews, it's reinforced that I still have so much to learn when it comes to listening to the other person without actually interrupting them.
It's so interesting you say that, because it totally reshapes your perspective on a conversation. So when you listen back, do you ever think, I missed a golden nugget because I spoke?
A lot. Sometimes, like every 10 episodes, I can see a change in my interviewing. Like I can feel like I'm better at stopping, even sometimes when it gets awkward silence, and just keeping quiet. And sometimes there's always something at the other end of that. And it's not always, sometimes it's just awkward. But it's fascinating. I mean, I love obviously podcasting from all different angles. Let's talk about what returns the podcast brings, right? Because it's probably the age-old question that I used to get asked the most is like, Ronsley, how do you make money? And let's talk about that, because you got different things happening that allow it to be sustainable. What are those different things?
So although podcasting is kind of like, if I were to write down what I did for a living, that would be top. There are other things that I do. And I will just say this, I wouldn't have been able to start a podcast. I started a podcast, and again, I had spoken to lots of my friends who are very successful on YouTube, and they all said, if your motivation for doing this is the money, then beware, because that can't be the motivation. So I had other things. I'm also a brand consultant. I was also doing some writing, and there are other bits and bobs that I do. But in terms of return, I will be very honest, it was 2 years of just putting the podcast out for nothing with no return. And then you start getting advertising interests, and you can work with various platforms, which I do. I work with Acast, and that's been a brilliant collaboration. But then also, because of my background as a beauty journalist, I have brands that I work with all the time in creating other types of content who might want to work with me on creating a specific episode, and we can turn that into something slightly more branded. So it's that balance between obviously having to make a living and having to, keep a roof over the head so that you can make the show, but also making sure that the integrity of the content remains really sound. So I'm always, if I do work with I won't work with anyone unless I believe in the brand or the product or whatever it is. And when I do create that episode, I make sure I'm quite strong about the editorial control I'll have. And if I feel like it's getting too pushy or if it's too branded, I always try and pull it back and say, let's make this as useful for a listener as possible. And trust me, that means that we need to do it in this way. And so far, that's worked really well. So I would like to think that if you see an episode of mine, and I always publish them midweek so that those Sunday shows are sacred. They are always organic and very, they're not sponsored. They're just pure, brilliant conversations with excellent people. But if you do tune into one of those episodes, hopefully you wouldn't know that you're listening to something branded. You would think that you were listening to something helpful. So if you wanted to find out about the latest innovations in retinol, for example, if you're a skincare buff, then you could find that out via this brand. And you would have so much general information as well as the specific information they want to share with you. But you have so much general information that's really empowering. So I try to keep that balance. But
No, obviously, there's no thought. It seems like you keep saying there's no thought, but every time I ask you a question, there's so many layers to the things considered, which is really fun. I mean, journalism is really interesting, right? I mean, coming from journalism into independent media like this, and seeing how journalism has changed so drastically, especially right now when you kind of don't know what kind of news to believe. You don't know which segment is covering the right news. It's almost like, okay, you get into journalism to tell the truth, and then now you can't find the truth anywhere. How does that whole thing sit with someone that has been in journalism and now is in independent media?
Well, just to be very clear about this, the kind of journalism I was in, my objective was never to tell the truth. My objective was to be Lois Lane. And my objective was to hang out with celebrities, if I'm being completely honest. Journalism is a really glamorous life. Because I grew up in a very small village, and I used to watch there used to be a show on in the UK back in the 90s called The Big Breakfast. And it was a really fun morning show. And as much as they covered the news and they did great interviews and stuff, they had a brilliant news entertainment section. And I just used to be in my school uniform watching that, waiting for 10 to the hour for that section. And they'd be at fashion shows and at award ceremonies, and I would just want to dive into the television and be there. And journalism was the easiest way to get there because I can't sing, I'm not a model, and I wasn't about to become famous. so if I'm honest, that was my reason.
But obviously it's gotten you to a point where you now get a kick out of having these conversations, because that seems to be what keeps the whole thing going with the Emma Gunn Show, the conversations that you have.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn so much from everybody, from anybody. Like, you can have anybody on the show, and if they're willing and open, because that is a crucial part of being a good guest, if they are open to having a conversation and just opening up to you, then anyone can be fascinating, genuinely. And so what I try to do with the people I get on the podcast is get experts, but also just find people who have a unique perspective. People that, for example, one of my guests that I always talk about, because it took me about a year to get it, and I was so happy, was I got Michelle Visage from RuPaul's Drag Race and many other things. And it was just such a brilliant opportunity to sit in a room with her and see life through her lens, which is completely foreign from mine. She grew up in New Jersey. She grew up in the club scene. I have no idea what that looks or feels like. And so to hear how life is for her through her experiences was really fascinating. And so I really do try to seek out people who I would just never come across normally. Because that's another, it's like traveling. People come away from holiday or traveling and they say, I'm going to travel more. It's so wonderful. The world is so beautiful. People are the same. Like, you travel through people's stories.
It's such a brilliant analogy about the traveling that you mentioned, because I think it's the perspective with the conversations, just like with traveling. I think it's the perspective that is so insightful, because you kind of look at it from someone else's lens and you got to get this perspective, and then you go, oh, I had never considered that. And you just sort of are more open to more things, I suppose. With the Emma Gunn Show, how do you get people to the show? Like, what are the ways that you sort of get attention to the Emma Gunn Show? Obviously coming onto other people's podcasts, but what are the other ways that you kind of go about getting attention for the show?
Getting guests or getting listeners?
Getting listeners.
Oh, not to sound like a broken record, I genuinely don't think, I need to get, I try not to get bogged down in the metrics.
Sure.
Because I think if you start thinking, right, but I want another 50,000 listeners, I think I don't know, I just think my attention is better served, better focused on getting great guests. And I think if you get great guests and have conversations that will be useful, then maybe I'm talking about magic beans here, but I feel like that's the way around it.
No, I'm not saying that it's the way around it. That's funny. What I meant was, like, so for example, like, once the show is released, like, is there a way that you get people to, like, is there an email list? You send an email out? Like, do you have other platforms? You, like, Instagram obviously is a platform for you. Is there a way that you inform everyone that, okay, here's one place, come to the Emma Gunn Show? Is there any of that happening?
Yeah, so Instagram is my strongest driver, but I have a Facebook group for the podcast, which is closed, and I use Twitter. But I have toyed with using email lists, and I'll be really honest, I'm one of the few people I know who doesn't have an assistant, because I'm that controlling. And I must admit, whenever I speak to someone and they're like, oh yeah, I'm a podcaster too, I'll get my assistant to set up a chat, I'm like, oh God, maybe I should. It just feels so ridiculous to me to, like, have an assistant. I don't know why. But the truth is, it would maximize my output. It would potentially, and it might be something I need to consider.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about logistics then. Like, so who's your team? Who does your show? Who does the editing? How does it all come together? Is it all the Emma Gunn Show?
It's all me.
Amazing. So this is crazy, right? So so when I started my podcast, this was like back in 2013, and it got all its attention, right? The agency that I started now, which is like, it used to be 29 people. When it started, I did everyone's job, just like you, but then started to outsource, and then it became this whole blown agency. I can't believe after all these years, you're still doing everything yourself. That is insane. So, well, my team put together these list of questions, right? So this is a question. She uploads every 1 to 3 days. How the fuck? I want to know.
So that's really flattering. Thank you. I have a Sunday show, which is the long form conversation, which could be with anyone. So it could be with somebody from the beauty industry. Like this Sunday, I've got a former Secret Service agent on. It could be Michelle Visage. It could be Andy Puddicombe from Headspace. Then on the Wednesday show, that started out as being just like a catch up because I had such a lovely dialogue with my listeners and my followers. It just became like a 10-minute catch up show. And but that's also sometimes where I'll put the sponsor content. And then in 2018, I had a franchise called 26 Habits, which was where I would make or break a habit every 2 weeks for the whole of 2018. And I published that on a Monday. So that ended up being 3 shows a week. But I worked on a weekly magazine. So creating content quickly to standard is not something, that's a muscle I flexed for many years. So I feel like that's quite strong. Then when I stopped doing 26 Habits, it just went down to 2 shows a week. And then in 2019, I decided to do a pod a day in May because it rhymed. And I think I was out running. And I thought, oh, that sounds quite catchy. So the hashtag was born before the content. But I did a podcast every day during the month of May in 2019. And then I did it again in December, which was Podmas, or what did I call it? Christmas podding. So I do like a pun. And now I started a franchise in lockdown called Feel Good Habits, which it just felt like there was something missing from my content based on the situation in the world, which was the underlying issue, the underlying message in my content is always like empowerment, like feel good, like learn more, like have access to all this information. But we just sort of needed to sort of take it to bare bones and let's talk to people about how they feel good on a crappy day. And that's really taken off. So yeah, it's Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday that I publish podcasts.
Phenomenal. So obviously habits is a big thing. I love habits. I was just talking about habits. In my previous meeting, which right now it's the end of the day, I really can't remember what it was. But what I'm trying to make, sorry, I've been developing habits, and the last couple of books that I've consumed was Jim Quick's Limitless, and then followed by that, Atomic Habits.
Oh, that's an amazing book.
And in the last 7 weeks, I've been brushing my teeth with my left hand, and I can do single leg squats with both legs while I'm brushing my teeth. And it's just been 7 weeks. And it's like, this is interesting. I bet you have something to say about all that.
Yeah. What's been really good about doing episodes like that and speaking to the kind of people that I speak to is the accountability it puts on me. And if you open up your world to all these people and all these different experts, it gets in, it embeds. And I just had I mean, it's not really a habit, but I had an amazing guest on a few weeks ago called James Nestor. And he's written this book called Breath. And it's the lost art of, it's basically we've lost the art of being able to breathe properly. We're all mouth breathers. And actually, it's so much better for your body, health-wise, to breathe through the nose. And he goes into all the data. And it's things like that. You find a guest like that, you research, you read the book, and then fundamentally the way you breathe has changed forever. It's the weirdest thing. And then, yeah, so somebody might come on, like I had Gretchen Rubin on the podcast, and she talked about habits, like good habits and being happy and being tidy. And so, and not just being tidy in the Marie Kondo way, but just like if you are someone who likes a lot of stuff around, have a lot of stuff around, just make sure it's organized and you know where stuff is. So it doesn't matter every time I make the bed, or every time I tidy my room or I clean the kitchen, those conversations are just like little echoes in the back of my mind of, I'm not just doing it so that the kitchen looks clean. Like I understand that there's a bit more of a thought to this now. So it's really funny. I'm sure you found this. If you've been doing it for nearly 8 years, I'm sure you found that you are so changed for it.
Massively. And not only changed, I mean, my network is insane. Like in terms of not in terms of, I mean, it's not like I look at the network and oh my God, it's just the kind of people and the stuff that they do and the things that they stand for and the conversations that we'll end up having and the depth, I suppose, into which we'll end up going. It's recently, through this whole process of Black Lives Matter, I've been interviewing a lot of Aboriginal elders because I'm new Australian, 11 years Australian, and it felt like I had no idea about the history of this country. And having those conversations and having a platform to give them a voice was actually something that I felt like, oh, okay, that's what 8 years has been building up to. But then I find that all the time, every time I have this new thing that someone talks about, and I'm like, oh wow, I wonder, that's crazy. I'm like, I wonder whether all these things are just a build up to this point. And it surprises me all the time. Like everything that happens in the podcasting world seems to surprise me, because I'm like, I did not plan on this happening. It just sort of happened.
What do you mean? What surprises you?
This is the one that I tell a lot. I had a conversation with a lady on my podcast about 4 or 5 years ago. And we had a couple of conversations. I got on my show a couple of times, and then we became friends. And fast forward a year later, she had her second baby and made me godfather. So I could not have planned for that whole situation. Like I it's just like some of the things that happen within and even when it comes to monetization, I suppose, some of the opportunities that come around, you're like, oh wow, I would have not seen that coming.
Yeah, it does open up the world.
Yeah. Do you have something similar in terms of like opportunities that have come your way that are like out of left field?
It's a good question. I think for me, because I had my dream set on being a magazine beauty director for such a long time, it really did. And that was something that I knew what it was going to look like. I knew what 20 years in that job was going to look like. And there was something quite appealing about that. And I'm really glad it didn't happen that way, actually, because again, a little like you say, with the podcast, I'm able, like, it feels as though the direction is, or it's always possible to redirect. It's always possible to do something slightly different. And every now and again, I'll do an episode with somebody and I think, oh, this might be the thing that this is too far left field. Like this guest is too much. And it always surprises me that it's not. So, for example, I've had 2 guests on this year, one a professional dominant, and we had a 2-hour conversation about understanding sexual desire, how he got into working in the sex trade. And so it's really not the kind of thing that people would think, oh yeah, the Emma Gunn Show, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And I had another guest on who was fantastic called Jeff Thompson, and he's wonderful and brilliant. But again, it's all about enlightenment. He used to be a bouncer, and now he's pretty much like a guru. Like the fact that the guy wasn't sitting in front of me as a ball of light is still a surprise to me. Like he's one of the most incredible people I've ever met. But it was just that thing of it sat outside of the groove that I think the show normally sits in. And so I sort of panic, but I really, really wanted to do them. So it's that thing of all the time pushing it and doing something that you think maybe I shouldn't, but I'm gonna do it anyway. which is a nice thing to get into, which I wouldn't have had if I'd worked on magazines, because that's very structured.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Emma Guns Show, emmaguns.com is where you got to check all the cool stuff. Or you try the whole link, which I'm going to fuck up anyway. So it's been a pleasure, little slice of heaven. This has been really cool to have a chat. And I mean, I do usually my interviews in the morning time.
No, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me. And it's morning for me and it's afternoon for you. So
this has been a cool conversation. Thank you for this.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Should I Start a Podcast? Next week, Ronsley talks to the podcast consultant, Matthew Passy. So make sure you tune in.